Welcome back to the channel, everybody. I'm Glenn McGowan. This is Atlas Bowen. Today is the day that I'm finally going to be doing some work to the only car in my collection that is completely stock. And I'm talking about my Porsche 911. So I have a 2009 997.2 Carrera 2 6-speed car over in the house garage that I've had for some time. It's my baby and I love it to death. And I've never done anything to it except for some clear side markers and some wheel spacers in the rear, which is essentially boring, but it's just a little touch. So I came to a realization the other day that I want to do some work to my Porsche. I want to just kind of change it essentially and make it look more like a Porsche should look like instead of just a stock car, which it is beautiful and I do love it the way it is, but the way I like to build my cars is, you know, suspension, wheels, I want them to look a little different than anything else on the road, and essentially it just looks like every other Porsche on the road at this point that's essentially a stock car. So I have to make those changes. I decided to do a transformation series now on this car. So we're gonna go over the car today. I'm gonna show you what it looks like as it is, and then we're gonna be doing a bunch of things through these next couple episodes of just making some changes and some improvements to it to essentially change the look of the car. So we're gonna get it in here, get the wheels off of the thing, and we're gonna go over the first project and start doing that today. This week's video is brought to you by LCOBMW Parts. Visit our online store for E36, E46, and E90 parts, or follow us on Instagram at LCOBMW. All the links are in the description below. Okay, so here she is. So the first thing that I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna lower the car. Now there's two routes you can go here. You could either go a lowering spring or coilovers. Now, it all depends on what you're using your car for. Now, if you take it to the track, you may wanna go with some high-end coilover. If you just wanna lower it down a little bit, springs are a good approach. So that's essentially what I'm gonna use for right now. So I bought a set of H&R lowering springs here. They essentially lower like 1.2 inches, so that might just do the trick for now. So one of the reasons why I did that was because the cars have magnetic suspension in them, PAS them, and if you go coilovers, you have to delete that. So you have to get the delete kit, which is like $500 or $600, which isn't the end of the world, but once you pick a decent coilover and then you're thousands of dollars in coilovers, which at this point I decided just not to. I figure springs is a couple $100 and maybe lower it and maybe it'll do the trick, because I don't take my car to the track, I just kind of drive it locally. So I figured this is a good approach. So a couple things you're gonna need to do this job. Now, keep in mind, I haven't done this before, so we're kind of doing it together, but I built several cars and I was a mechanic and stuff like that. So I'm very experienced in suspension and all that kind of stuff like that. Just not on the 911 platform, but I am excited to dive in on this. So a couple things you're gonna need a spring compressor. So you can either rent one of these from an auto parts store. They're actually pretty cheap. I bought this for like, I think it was like under 40 bucks or something on Amazon. And that's essentially what it is. And all it does is just clamp down on the spring and you can take the top part of the strut off. So you're gonna need something like that. And another thing you're gonna need too, if your car has magnetic suspension, is you need some form of slotted socket. And I believe it's a 19 and a 21 millimeter slotted socket. Now I did order a set because I don't have any. Just to give you an example, this is a socket for like a strut that has a hole through it. So there's a connector coming out of your strut that you essentially have to go through the socket so you can get the socket on there and loosen the nut and tighten it. So you're gonna need those things. Besides that, I'm gonna jack the car up and get the wheels off and then pull the front suspension out and start swapping over the springs. Okay, so I got the car jacked up, the wheels are off. I just want to show you a couple things if you're doing this for the first time like me. It's not the first time I jacked the car up, but I have this little pad here, and I think they sell something. There's 4 jacking points, which I'm going to show you real quick. I have this is actually a jacking pad for an E36 BMW that I just kind of modified a little bit to go up into the hole so I can get a jack underneath of it. But you just have to be careful there because it's just a small little metal plate to put the jack on. So having something like this really comes in handy. But I just wanted to show you these points real quick, and then we'll look in the wheel wells and see what we have to take off. So right under there is one, and then the back one is there where I have the jack sitting on. And then front of the wheel well here, there is one pinch bolt right there, which we're going to take off. And then the top, we're going to do inside underneath the hood and take the trim panels off there, which we're going to do next. Now in the back, there is one bolt down there holding that in, and the same thing holding that up there in top inside the car, which we'll have to take some of the interior off to get to. Okay, so I'm underneath the hood here. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this battery access panel here. This. And then I'm going to lift up these pieces here. Just clip up out of the way. Like that. And then there is the bolts for the strut. And then this is cover here. And there's the top of the strut. Okay, so now that I can see the top of the struts, I'm realizing that this car probably does not have the magnetic suspension because there's no connectors coming out of the top of the struts. There is the switch for it on the inside, so I'm not sure what's going on there. I thought for sure they all had them. So for right now, I am going to just work on taking the speaker shelf out behind the rear seats first. And just check those out too. I am starting to rethink the coilover idea at this point. So, but before I get ahead of myself, let's take that out just so we can access the top of those. All right, now the seats are folded down and we're gonna take this piece off here. This is a Torx 40. Get this off. Pull that out of the way, and then there's this trim here that says bows on it. Just take a little pry tool here and this just pops essentially right off like that. And then behind here there is a Torx 25. I'll take this off. So I just realized that Torx here for these small screws behind the trim, they're actually Torx 30s on this car. Now I'm just sliding this forward like this. And there's a connector here. Let's see here. In the back over here. Try to zoom in. Connector right here. And there is just 2 tabs that you essentially squeeze together. Pull that out. Like that, and now you can take this whole thing out of there. Okay, so in here is this little foam carpet insert here. You just kind of pull that up, and then back in here is the top of your strut, and this is now confirming that this does not have magnetic suspension. So it's been a couple days now, and after I got, everything essentially apart to access the top of the struts, I made a decision because in the back of my head was like, oh, it's not magnetic suspension. That was kind of the deterring reason why I didn't want to go with coilovers, because I was just, when I was figuring out what I wanted to do with the car, I was like, it's one more thing I don't want to do with the lights on, or, having to spend extra money for, the modules and stuff like that. And then when I saw that it wasn't, I instantly was like, get coilovers. So I stopped, went inside,
I ordered my coilovers, they're arriving today. So I'm gonna just continue going down the road of taking these apart. But at this point, I won't be putting the springs on the car. I am gonna do exactly what I wanna do originally, because I just know in the back of my head, and I know myself that, you know, if I would put the springs on the car, it would have lowered it, it would have looked okay, and I'm sure it's fine for, you know, anybody who wants to go springs. I think it's a really good route, and it's not a terribly expensive route. For like 300 bucks, you can get a set of springs, lower your car, and increase handling, all that kind of stuff. And H&R is a really good product. But I figured, you know, I always love running coilovers on all my cars. It's kind of my thing. So I'm like, I don't want to do this twice. Let me order the coilovers that I want, and let's just put them on and just kind of be done with it, essentially, as far as the suspension is concerned. So I'm glad I made that decision. I'm super psyched about it now. So I'm just awaiting. In a couple hours, they'll be here. But in the meantime, we're going to tear the struts out of this car now and then just wait for them. And when I get them, we'll open up the box, look at them, set them up, get them back on this thing. One more thing that you will need too is a ball joint separator tool. Essentially because when you're like lowering the front down, the strut sits in the knuckle pretty deep, and instead of like stressing out the rack or just hanging it down, you can just take the tie rod off. And the same thing with the back too. I think you gotta take the sway bar out in the back, or at least loosen everything. And I think there is one link that has to come off. So having a ball joint separator is key, just to, you know, pop that out without having to smack with a hammer or something like that. So besides that, you know, we're gonna continue down the road, and maybe I will show you just a couple things with the springs. Like all you're doing essentially is just, you know, putting the spring compressor on the spring, tightening it down, taking that top nut off essentially, and then same process going back on. You know what I mean? You take that off, relieve the stress off the spring, and then you're gonna essentially tighten up the new spring, put it on, tighten that nut down. That's the only thing that we're not gonna be doing, is essentially swapping the springs over, but we are doing coilovers and removing and installing struts essentially. So let's just get to it now and get this old stuff out. So I'm gonna start in the front, and I'm gonna start down here by the knuckle, mainly to keep the strut up inside the car while I'm taking this apart, so it's not hanging down here and moving all around. So this is your tie rod here. This is 18 millimeter, and then on the inside there, if it spins on you, that's a Torx 40. So if you loosen this and this whole thing starts spinning, you may have to put an open end wrench on here like that, and then use your Torx 40 in here to hold it still while you loosen it like that. Now, as far as here on the knuckle, this pinch bolt, that's 18 millimeters. And on the other side of the sway bar link, I believe that's a 16 millimeter nut there that you just have to put an open end wrench on. It's either 16 or 17 to put a wrench on that to hold that while you're loosening that. I do have a jack underneath here too, so once that's loose, I can just lower this down a little bit so it just doesn't flop down. Just gonna use a breaker bar first, kind of crack it loose here. So I'm getting ready to remove this ball joint here. So what I ended up doing is running the nut down, upside down, almost all the way down. You kind of do it with an open end wrench, so I can get a nice, good, flat spot on top of that nut there. And now I'm gonna just tighten it down. And all done. So now I have my pinch bolt for the strut and the sway bar link pulled out here. I can just push this down like this, and as you can see, it'll come out like that. So now I'm just gonna go up top and unbolt this from the car. So there's just 3 13 millimeter head nuts here to take this top off. So another quick tip too, if you are swapping springs over, you can put a jack under the lower control arm, jack the strut up, and then remove this nut and essentially lower the jack down, and that will separate the spring from the strut top here, so you don't actually have to use a compressor tool to remove the spring, but you'd have to use it to put it back on. So that's one just quick way too, just to kind of cut down some time. Now I have the whole strut assembly loose, and I essentially have to move this whole knuckle down. So one thing I'm going to do is loosen the inside control arm there. I'm not gonna take the bolt out, you just loosen it, just to allow it to travel down. But if you do it without removing the lower splash shield here, you could crack it because it comes up real close to the control arm right here. So there's a bunch of Torx 25s here to take this off. So I'm just gonna remove this and then loosen that control arm, and then I'll be able to push this whole assembly down and pull the strut out. So I have the front splash shield out. Just want to show you what it looked like. So there's all these small holes where the bolts go. Now in the back here, this is kind of tucked up essentially underneath the rear part. And there's 10mm nuts, plastic nuts holding this in here. But there's another piece that goes kind of underneath that. And then back a little bit, there's another 10mm nut on either side. So if you essentially loosen those, you can pull this thing down and enough to slide it forward. And it actually, you have to kind of push it back because there's a metal piece here that this clips into. So you just kind of take your time and make sure that it's not getting hung up back here, because there's actually studs that come down from the car that hold this down. You kind of got to pick it up past the stud, then slide it forward. Now I have a breaker bar with a 16mm nut on that control arm bolt, and then an 18mm open end wrench down in there, and just loosening it. It's kind of tight in there, so however you can get a combination of wrenches on that, just loosen it. As I was loosening it, this is just coming down, so it takes enough pressure off of it that you can pull this whole thing down and out. So I'm getting ready to pull this out here, and I just wanted to free up a couple things because these sensors and the brake hose is getting kind of tight and pulled on and kind of stressing it out there. So instead of pushing it down and forcing that, I'm going to unbolt the brake caliper here. I already took out, there's a 10mm here for this bracket for the hose, and then there's another 10mm bolt that holds this connector to the knuckle assembly, and then this piece here just to disconnect it. You just slide that up, pull these pieces out here like that, and then at that point you're going to take Torx 55 for your brake caliper. There's two bolts, one up top here and then one down there, which I already loosened, and then I'm just going to pull this up and then hang it out of the way here with a bungee cord. Then I'll be able to push down on this hard and pull the strut out. So I just let the jack down. I did have a jack underneath that when I was taking the brake caliper off because it was kind of falling all over the place. But once you loosen that back control arm, this thing just wants to fall out of there. So keeping a jack on there is probably the right thing to do. And as you can see, I just got the brake caliper kind of out of the way there, and then the connectors are out of the way. And then now you have all this room just to grab this old girl here, lift it up, slide it out. Okay, so driver's side one's done. I'm gonna do the same thing to the other side, and once that's out, I'll go right to the back and take all those out. So I just finished up getting the front out, so now I'm gonna jump into the back and get these rear ones out real quick. So first things first, we gotta take the sway bar out. Two 13mm here, and then down there, right here, is a 60mm nut, and then that's going to spin on you, and the inside of that is a Torx 30 that you put in there to keep it from spinning. So take that out of the way first, and then there's this through bolt here for the strut, 18mm on one end, on the nut end, and then 16mm here. And then last thing we'll do is get it out from inside the car there. And I think we may have to take this off too, which is an 18, and I think like a Torx 30 in the center there too. Now I'm going to get these top nuts here. These are 15mm. All right, now I'm just going to do this toe rod here, 18mm. Now just disconnect this. Now I can just lift it up out of here like this. And that's it. So I just wait for the UPS driver to drop all these coilovers, and then we can put this thing back. Okay, so perfect timing. Just showed up. I got these bad boys here. I opened them up and I'll show you. So I have BC Racing coilovers on my E36 M3. I've had them on there, I think probably coming up on 8 years now, and I had zero issues with them at all. I really like them a lot. I was gonna put these on my E46, but I ended up going with like ECS Tunings brand, which I'm really happy with too. They're actually pretty good too. But with the 911, I figured, you know what, let's do BC Racing again because they're really good. I actually called them directly instead of going through a vendor, because they have vendors essentially have them shipped right from BC Racing anyway, mainly because it was like a time crunch. I wanted to like make sure I got these in time while I had the car jacked up. It was like 2 days from when I ordered them to when they just showed up. So these are the front left, and I'll pull these out and then we'll do a zoom in picture. But the quality of these things are just really, really nice. Up close view there. And like bang for the buck though, realistically, they're really not that bad. So these were, I think they go for like $14.10 is like the universal price. I paid a little bit more because I ordered it right through BC Racing's site, which is like another $50 on top of that. But it was, to me, it's like I just wanted to get here and make sure they're here in a timely manner. I didn't want to like wait and then have to ship it from somewhere else. And you know, 4 days later, 5 days later, I get them. So then this is the rear. That. Pretty nice. And the front, wrenches, and the other rear. All right, so I'm just getting ready to pack some anti-seize down here on the threads. I also just double checked the preload on the spring. Now, if you've never done that before, what you do is you run this top collar all the way up to the spring no longer wiggles around, and then you run the bottom collar. You do it like hand tight, so it's kind of snug against the spring so it doesn't wiggle around in there. And then you run this bottom collar here all the way up to it stops. And then you essentially, unless you have like a spec from your coilover supplier, you essentially run this top collar up, loading the spring, so taking the wiggle out. Kind of like a rule of thumb is use the thickness of your tool in between that. And you're literally judging that by this top collar is going up, you tighten that up, and then when you have enough space in between there, your wrench will fit. Then you run this bottom collar all the way up, lock it in place, then that's your preload. Now I'm gonna just kind of unscrew this and load these threads with the anti-seize just so there's no issues. I am gonna set these all the way down too. So they would say it's anywhere from a 1 inch to a 2 inch drop with coilovers. And this car had a big wheel well space in there. So 2 inch is pretty much what it needs. So I'm just gonna put them all the way down and then check it from there. So I'm ready to go back together. This is how you're supposed to have the front here. Because of the camber adjustment, it's got to go in like negative and positive camber this way. So that L there is for the left side, obviously, and then this goes in towards the car there. So it's sitting down in the knuckle like that. And now I'm going to put it back up underneath, and I have a jack underneath it. Then I'm going to jack it up into place. Now it's in place, I can just start putting it back together. They actually come with their own nuts here, so I'm gonna throw these down. Now how I normally set my coilovers up, I essentially, whatever the setting is, if it's like 30 or whatever, I set it like right in the middle. And then at that point, you can kind of adjust it, you know, down or higher from there. All right, so all 4 coilovers are installed. Dying to get this thing off the jack stand so I can take a look at it, but I still have 2 more things I have to do to it until then. So for now, I have to wait. So if you enjoyed the video, hit that like button. Thanks for watching.